Hi, everybody. Come on in. We can get this started here. Welcome, everyone. My name is John Storella, and I am California Chapter Head of Principles First. Principles First is an organization dedicated to the principles of liberal democracy, those articulated in the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. And we have events like this all over the country, but our major event is a 2-day summit in Washington, D.C., which we're going to have this year on February 20th to 22nd. It's a great event. We're going to have thought leaders, politicians, academics coming and talking about the issues of the day. It's a very exciting event. We'd like to have you come there if you're interested. You can reach us at principlesfirst.us. That's one word, Principles First. Now, one of the principles that our group is dedicated to is respect for the rule of law. So we are delighted to be co-hosting this event with the Society for the Rule of Law. They're an organization that is dedicated to protecting the rule of law and the Constitution from the illiberal chaos around us. They also have events like this around the country. I've been to some. They're very nice. And they had a great event in D.C., their national summit, which I can tell you was very lively. So if you're interested in them, go to societyfortheruleoflaw.org. That's all one word. Now, what I want to do now is to introduce the Executive Director of Principles First, Brittany Martinez. Let me tell you a little bit about her because she's also going to be the moderator here. Brittany's a political strategist. She worked as communications director for Kevin McCarthy when he was a congressman and a speaker. She also worked as communications director for an Ohio Senate campaign. And before that, she was deputy director of Hispanic media for the Republican National Committee. Brittany, please come up, give her a warm hand, and we'll get started.
Hi, everybody. Ooh, it's so nice to be here with you tonight. And, you know, it's funny, I am a fairly short gal, but this podium is a little bit shorter today because I'll watch back some of these clips and it just looks like a talking head above the podium. So hopefully you can see me okay. But thank you, John, for the introduction and for your leadership, especially when it comes to California. And so a little bit more about Principles First, and I'll make it quick because I know we want to get started with these incredible panelists, is we started in 2019 as a center-right alternative to what was the extreme nature we felt of CPAC. And it started with our founder, Heath Mayo, who's wonderful. He is a lawyer by day, a 24/7 Principles First volunteer founder by 24/7. I said that a little bit wrong. Oops. But he dedicates so much of his time to this organization. So we're very grateful for his leadership. And it started with a couple tweets, some Google Forms, a couple meetups at Applebee's across the country of like 5 people. And now we get to have really cool events everywhere, including this one in San Francisco. This is the first time we're doing sort of this dinner speaker series. And so we're really, really glad to be here. We're so grateful for all of you to be here with us tonight. And for Principles First, so, you know, as John mentioned to you, very clearly, I'm a Republican. I still consider myself a Republican. But the thing that's really cool about Principles First is that we have folks that are, you know, a little bit all around the political spectrum. We have folks like myself who still consider themselves Republicans. We have folks that are so disgruntled, former Republicans, they don't want anything to do with the party anymore. And maybe they're independent. Some of them are Democrats now. We even have Democrats who are unhappy with the Democrat Party and what's going on in leadership over there. And so I think basically, you know, what brings us together is that we're just common sense Americans who said enough is enough. We need normalcy in our politics. We need civility in our politics. And it doesn't have to be this way. So thank you for being in the room with us tonight, because you're probably here because you feel the same way, or maybe you got dragged here. Who knows? But we do have our summit coming up in February, so we hope to see you there. And the last thing that I'll say, which is kind of funny, you know, I said we started in 2019 as counter-programming to CPAC, is that we will be at the Gaylord in National Harbor, Maryland, which is where CPAC used to be, but they couldn't fill the seats, so we've taken over the venue. So it's a a little bit of a full circle moment that I just like to bring up because I think it's fun. We're the adults in the room, but sometimes it's okay to be a little bit petty, you know? It's a little bit fun. So without further ado, I'm going to start introducing our panelists who can make their way to the stage. So first and foremost, we have Gregg Nunziata is a Society for the Rule of Law Executive Director. Gregg is an attorney, public policy professional, and a veteran of the conservative legal movement. He served as Chief Nominations Counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee, playing a key strategic role in the confirmation proceedings for scores of federal judges and executive branch appointees. He also served as policy counsel to the Senate Republican Policy Committee and later as general counsel and domestic policy advisor to then Senator Marco Rubio. Earlier in his career, Gregg served in the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division and worked as a litigator in international law firm. Thanks for being here, Gregg, and for being a co-host. Next is Jay Nordlinger. He is a political journalist and music critic. Jay, I actually didn't even know this. This is so cool and exciting. He's a senior resident fellow at the Renewed Democracy Initiative and a contributor to RDI's publication, The Next Move. He is a music critic of The New Criterion. He writes on Substack at Onward and Upward. He is a contributing writer for The Dispatch, and he hosts 2 podcasts, Q&A and Music for a While. I'm native of Michigan. He has long lived in New York. Thank you for being here.
Now, Principles First is not a partisan organization, but I just want to say, as one partisan, I'm going to make one exception to Jay. Go blue. Go! Thank you. Make me feel right.
And last but certainly not least, Ben Wittes. He is a senior fellow in governance studies at Brookings and the co-founder and editor-in-chief of Lawfare. The author of several books, Wittes previously spent nearly a decade as an editorial writer for the Washington Post, specializing in legal affairs. Before joining the Post's editorial page, he covered the Justice Department and federal regulatory agencies as a reporter and news editor at Legal Times. He also hosts the Lawfare podcast and the delightfully irreverent Dog Shirt Daily. Thank you for being here. And so we are so lucky to have all of you and your expertise. So as we get started here, I want to say a little lightning round in one word, or if it's a phrase, that's okay. In one word to a phrase, the constitutional issue keeping you up at night right now is...
There's so many. I'd say domestic use of the military.
Hello, I'm needed help turning my mic. Ben, you're such a pro.
Thank you.
It's almost like I do it for a living.
Yes. The whole issue of whether Americans want a constitutional republic, or whether we can keep it, to harken back to Franklin, that's my ball of wax.
Yeah, you just encapsulated mine, which is whether, in fact, we want powers to be separated or not.
Thank you. And I forgot to say...
Good night, everyone. Nice being here.
Yes. And I forgot to mention, we're going to take audience questions, so please start thinking of those, and I'll go to the audience a few times, and if you don't have any in the moment, then I'll keep asking questions, and maybe we can get the speakers figured out a little bit during that time. Okay, so our next question. Which is more dangerous to democracy at this moment? Corruption, apathy, or disinformation?
Corruption.
I'm going to vote apathy. I'm for, I think what we desperately need is the renewal of civic education. I was thinking this morning, anticipating being here, and a phrase from American history came to me. what this country needs is a really good 5-cent cigar. And I looked that up, and it was Woodrow Wilson's vice president, Thomas R. Marshall, who'd been governor of Indiana. I say what this country needs is the renewal of civic education, kind of an America 101. How's it supposed to work? I think people my age had this in elementary school and later in junior high. Actually, a class called civics, and I lapped it up. And I suppose that's what I want from Santa.
Yeah, I feel encumbered coming after Jay here because he keeps giving these broad answers.
Well, I read you.
That broad answers that encompass the answers that I was going to get. So first of all three of these are the same thing: corruption and apathy and disinformation are all creatures of a lack of virtue, and the absence, the disbelief in civic virtue is the root of all of those problems.
Thank you. And for our last rapid fire round, and Ben, I can start with you this time.
I'll give an answer that's broad enough to moot out whatever Jay is going to say.
Perfect. So fill in the blank. A president absolutely should never
accept a jet from the government of Qatar.
That'd be a good one.
A president should never place himself outside the constitutional order. He is an officer of government. He's a kind of steward or a custodian. And I was recalling yesterday, this is not very lightning, I'm sorry, Brittany, but I'll make it fast.
No, please.
So you remember who Ernesto Cedillo is? He was president of Mexico, probably the best president of Mexico in the modern era. And he was asked afterward, what are the three things Mexico most needs? He said, the rule of law, the rule of law, and the rule of law. And I thought in sort of a, I'm afraid, somewhat condescending way, that's pretty sweet for Mexico. Hell, that's what we need. Exactly. And I'm a pretty opinionated fellow with very strong views about politics and policy. But all that is out the window, at least temporarily. I'm for the maintenance of the rule of law.
Yeah, I think Jay mostly took my answer too. But I think a president must never forget that he is not just head of a government, but he's head of state, and that he has a duty to represent the entire country. And I think a lot has gone wrong in recent years, but maybe that's at the root of much of it.
Thank you. And maybe Jay answers this one last. No, I'm kidding. To give everyone else a chance. No, I'm kidding. I want to change, topic for a second. So you have a lot of experience. Well, first of all, you're all experts in your field. And that's why you're here, and thank you for being here. And when you talk about things, you can talk about it with conviction, with wisdom, with knowledge, right? As practitioners. That's not so much the case these days when it comes to politics. We've seen the rise of political influencers, many of whom have, for lack of a better term, infiltrated the Department of War. Is that what we're calling it now? As you guys may have seen this week, the new press corps, was going around taking photos at the Washington Post. Everyone apparently got the old Washington Post desks. That was kind of the joke going around the cubicle. So as we talk about misinformation and disinformation and the way that we're talking about these things, I just wonder what is your opinion on kind of what's going on there with the press corps, some of our sort of institutional media journalists being removed for sort of political influencers who, in my opinion, are kind of coming in there pretty adjacent to state-run media. Right? And so I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that.
I mean, this administration came into office promising to restore the First Amendment to great fanfare, right? And I think from the very beginning of the administration, they've been extremely hostile to a free press, and it's just one aspect of it. It's deeply concerning.
I will say I mean, as somebody who spent 10 years at the Washington Post, I don't think it is a terrible thing. And there is a crisis of the press right now that is quite independent of this administration. It has to do with the inability of conventional large media organizations to find a funding model that works. And there are many proposed solutions to this problem, none of them fully effective. And a lot of them necessarily give space to what, for lack of a better term, we can call influencers, which are just people who declare themselves capable of covering things, often themselves, some of whom are superb, by the way, and some of whom, when they're really good, we tend to call them things other than influencers. We tend to call them bloggers or, independent journalists, right? When they suck, we call them influencers. The problem here is partly that the administration is contemptuous of the First Amendment and contemptuous of the press. That is a real problem. But the other problem is that the press institutionally lacks the gravity, and some of this is just a business model problem, that it does not inspire fear on the part of the administration, which is actually what creates the press's power, right? Historically, is that it, there's a reason we called it the fourth estate, right? Or the fourth branch, right? It had its own constitutional status and it maintained it, and it has lost that because it does not inspire fear in the same way. And I think that's something that the press needs to think about as institutionally. Why is it possible to throw the press out of the Pentagon and invite Laura Loomer in instead? And that's to some degree because Donald Trump is a scoundrel and because Pete Hegseth is a scoundrel and a moron. But that's not an adequate answer, right? It has to also be because there was inadequate deterrence to do that. And I think thinking about that as an institutional problem, as a business model problem, as a force of the press collectively and the individual organizations associated with the press individually is a really important thing to do.
Well, for many years, people like me hoped and prayed for the decentralization and democratization of the media. We had a couple.
Careful what you wish for, man.
Exactly. That's the punchline. Exactly. We had a handful of very influential newspapers that other newspapers copied or looked up to. We had 3 broadcast networks plus PBS. And people like me wanted to break this. And boy, is it broken. And to a degree, we live in what some people call the post-truth age, or the age of siloization. Everyone in his own media silo. Everyone curating his own media. What sounds good. If that news is unwelcome to me, it's fake news, and so on. And this is a disaster for our polity, I think, and for our society. I'm slightly proud of myself. I pat myself on the back. I have a coinage. The expression, you are what you eat. About 7-8 years ago, I took to saying, you are the media you consume. Because when people talk to me, I feel I can hear the media they consume. They're at the mercy of it, or they place themselves at the mercy of it. So, what to do about it? Geez, what it takes is responsible citizenship. So many of these irresponsible journalists or media personalities, they're fantastically rich. Who makes them so? The people. I'm not a politician, so I can talk like that.
speaking of politicians, many Americans feel the presidency is growing more and more powerful, regardless of who occupies the office. We've seen that a lot play out. This administration, Congress essentially relinquishing their tariff powers for one. As Republicans, our belief system has generally been limited government, but we also see an administration where the president is trying to take over things from our higher education system to what's going on at the Kennedy Center in Washington, D.C. So, what are your thoughts on the power of the president? And do you think this is a trend that has been happening that maybe we're just now really starting to pay attention to?
Call on someone, Brittany.
Jay, why don't you go first?
Do you sense, in the dark of night, as you're trying to drift off to sleep, do you think that a lot of people like a strongman? I do. I'm not sure that a Republican, small r Republican heart beats in the breast, or wherever the heart is, of every citizen. I'm not so sure about that. People like a show. I like, especially as I get older, I like politics that's boring, that's humdrum, pedestrian, predictable, played between the 40-yard lines, as we used to say. Other people like something else, and I just wonder how exceptional we Americans are. I'm not sure I believe this is a big topic for you all. I'm not sure I believe in American exceptionalism. I'm not sure I believe in a national DNA. Nations shift. My two prime examples are Portugal and Scotland. I have a little speech on that, which I can spare you. But nations shift, and they can shift in a positive direction or a negative one. And the one consolation is, I've been quoting this for years now, something from the 19th century French scholar, Ernest Renan. A nation is a daily plebiscite. Sometimes translated, a nation is a daily referendum. There's good news and bad news there. The bad news is that which is good doesn't stick. I always thought that the United States should run on a kind of constitutional autopilot or cruise control. It doesn't really matter who's president. We're a nation of laws, not men. And these are just, personalities temporarily occupying these positions. Oh, no. No, I know a little bit better now. But the good news is that if you're off course, you can change course. A nation is a daily plebiscite. And I'm hoping for, this sounds too much like wokeness, but I mean this in an older sense. I'm hoping for a Democratic small d and a Republican small r awakening.
I want to distinguish between two types of presidential power. One is the irreducible core of the president's constitutional Article 2 power, which is not for any of us to discern. It's ultimately for the president to assert, for Congress to push back if it chooses, and for the Supreme Court to decide the parameters of. And there are legitimate arguments between the Dick Cheneys of the world, may he rest in peace, and more moderate thinkers about what the parameters of that power legitimately are within solidly democratic, small d democratic circles. I want to suggest that we pay too much attention to that question. And the question we pay too little attention to is the powers that Congress has given to the president that are indisputably not part of the irreducible core of presidential power. They are irreducibly congressional powers, like, for example, the power to tariff, the power to declare national emergencies, the power to respond to events by calling up the National Guard. These are powers that Congress got lazy with. the power to regulate all sorts of things. Some of these, by the way, are traditional conservative bugaboos. Some of them are traditional liberal bugaboos. What they have in common is they're areas where Congress got lazy. And instead of deciding, we're going to do X in this instance, but not in this instance, what it did is it passed a broad delegation of power to the president and said, whenever you determine that X condition is met, you can do any of the following 30 things. And by the way, each of those 30 things is written in very broad terms. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these statutes. Now, if we could all declare a moratorium on the arguments about Category 1 and focus on the extremity of the delegations that we've created to the presidency in Category 2, we would do an enormous amount of good. A lot of these powers need to be taken away. They need to be taken away not because they have no legitimate basis in policy. They did at the time that they were passed. They had a legitimate basis because we, as Jay says, nominated people to be president from both parties who were playing within the 40-yard lines, right? In a world in which your choice is Bob Dole or Bill Clinton, you can delegate a lot of power to the president, and there's not that much risk. That's not the world we're living in right now. And in the world that we're living in, broad delegations of power to do things like declare people to be unlawful, which is, the president, and I supported this law, the president has the power to point at any foreign group and say it's a terrorist organization, and it becomes a crime to provide it material support. And material support means anything you want to do to engage with it, other than the purest of pure speech. The power to do things like that, if you're contemplating the election of truly reckless human beings, these are loaded guns. And we need to think about the arsenal of loaded guns that we have given to the presidency. If we were a family and had a cabinet full of such loaded guns and left it unlocked and available to the children, we would be prosecuted for negligence. And for, that is a small picture of the scale of what we're talking about. And we need to have a very serious conversations about the delegation, particularly but not exclusively, of emergency powers. I think the delegated powers are a much bigger problem than the inherent powers of the presidency.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with all of that. This is the kind of the crisis or the constitutional challenge of our time, and it's going to be with us after this presidency, whenever it ends in 3 or 7 years. Our founders gave us a system that protects us against government overreach through checks and balances. When the government intrudes in our lives too much, or it mishandles the trust we've given it, we don't have the option here of a vote in Parliament for a new leadership. There's no snap elections. We've got this administration for 4 years. Our liberties depend on checks and balances, and we've given them away, right? We have a president who overreaches because we have a Congress that lets him, and we have a Congress that lets him because we have a people that vote for that Congress. People run campaign ads as Republicans today, or as Democrats when we have a Democratic president. Send me to Washington to fight for the president. Like, that is not your job. These people are running campaign ads promising you that they will fail you and that they will not perform their constitutional duty. And that's a problem. I mean, it's a crisis of civics. It's that Americans do not understand what their Congress is for, and their Congress is not doing its job, and we need to make them. And I think it absolutely starts, at the very least, at scaling back emergency powers.
I think that is a great segue to this next thing that I want to ask. And again, after this, and I'll open it up to audience questions, and we can ask them throughout the evening. But, you said something really interesting just now, Gregg, and it's about our civics education and what that looks like in the United States. I'm sure you have seen, as I've seen, I'm sure you all as well, or maybe conversations with family members, right? Or people saying, you know what, I am not okay with dictatorship, but I'm okay with having the president kind of be a dictator in this moment and get us on track. And then, then we'll get back to normal, which I think is such an obscene thing to say. What do we do about that? How do we talk about civics education? And when we think about the future of the country and what is happening now with this administration, I mean, how do we sort of rebuild sort of what already exists and shouldn't have to be rebuilt, but is this going to be legal challenges when we try to have Congress or whatever it is kind of go back to supporting the Constitution in a more robust manner? Is it an expectation moving forward that in the position of the presidency that they can just sort of overhaul all of these things?
Look, I think I think the judiciary has acquitted itself pretty well over these few years. I think the courts will stop some bad things. I think there are some opportunities after this presidency to think about some reforms in Congress that will put us on a better course. But ultimately, the problem's much, much deeper than that. It's a lack of understanding in the American people of what liberal democracy is. There was been a lot of talk over the last few years about defending democracy, and I don't think that people will be moved to defend what they have if they don't understand the value of the thing that they have. Liberal democracy, we think of democracy as this just natural state of being, but it's not terribly natural. I mean, you're asking people who win an election and get power to not just take what they want. You're asking them to be satisfied with imperfect, slow government. And you need to teach people kind of a habit of heart and teach them to understand that this system works well. It won't give you everything you want when you're in power, but it won't let the other side take everything from you when you're not. That it's a system that accommodates us all. We can't all agree on everything, but we can live together. And this is the system that lets us do that. I think that I just read this a couple weeks ago that apparently there's never been a famine in a liberal democracy, a democracy governed by the rule of law. And that's an amazing thing. It's because, and there's kind of a left-wing and a right-wing story you could tell about that, because in a democracy, government is properly ordered and is allocating things the way that the people need it. Or you could say, well, when with stable, predictable laws, the markets actually work and resources are allocated properly. But it's a really powerful truth that I think people do not understand sufficiently, that the rule of law and democracy contributes just mightily to their well-being, to their safety. And we need to really, I think next year, the 250th anniversary is an opportunity for really deep discussion about what democracy and what law is and how badly we all need it.
Let me give a little homily on leadership. I'll be brief. Leadership at various levels. Parents are so important. I know you come to me for such unusual wisdom. Parents, education at home, school teachers, coaches, clergymen, so on and so forth, little platoons, civil society. People can contribute so much in their individual lives. And then there are political leaders. And this will feel free to snicker at me, but in recent years I've understood just how much leadership means. Let me explain myself. When I was growing up, I always heard, the president sets the tone in this country. Like, what a ridiculous thing to say. We're a great big continental nation from sea to shining sea, as Bill Buckley used to say. There were at the time something like 220 million people. We're a bottom-up society, not a top-down society. We're a nation of rugged individualists. We're going about, leading our own lives. Who cares who's president? President sets the tone. I thought that was offensive. By golly, it's true. The president does set the tone to a considerable degree. And I think of to my mind, our greatest president, the greatest American, the 16th President Lincoln, said that leaders can appeal to the better angels of men's nature or the worse angels. And because this duality exists, right? And I've seen that the power of demagogues and grifters, con artists, how they can appeal to the base instincts of human beings. And that must be countered by good leaders. But where I wish leaders didn't matter so much, because that's the kind of liberal or classical liberal I am. But leaders do matter a lot. And we have a deficiency. I think of, we used to say when we were young, mice are men. And I see this obsequiousness around the president. It's embarrassing. It's unmanly, dare I say. I think the State Department's Thanksgiving message began, we're so grateful to live under President Trump. My God, this is idolatry. Who are we? Who are we, for heaven's sakes? You should be able to flip the bird to the president and be fine. That's the nature of America. Shouldn't have to grovel, law firms, of business. It's grotesque. So, as you can see, my views are very mild on the subject, and I'll give it over to Ben, the much more temperate Ben Wittes.
I will just add to that that the premise of the question, which is I don't believe in dictatorship, but I just want a temporary dictator to set things right.
A little bit pregnant.
Is actually consistent with the nature of the office of dictator under Roman law, which was envisioned as a temporary office, right? So the Senate would appoint somebody dictator, and that would give him power of life and death over every Roman citizen until the crisis was resolved. And then that person had to yield up the office. And it was one of the only truly unpardonable crimes in Rome to not give up the office of dictator when the crisis was resolved. And so this is actually where the word dictator comes from. It's where the concept of a dictator comes from. And of course, it didn't work. Now, it did work in the general sense that I think everybody always gave up the role of dictator. And so in the narrow sense, of course, the concept actually had incredible normative power over the Roman Republic. But of course, the Roman Republic itself evolved into an imperial dictatorship. And we don't remember the word dictator as a temporary state of affairs, even though that's what it was. We don't remember it for this quality of putting things right and then stepping aside, right? To the extent that we remember that concept, we associate it with Cincinnatus, right? Who it was in fact a dictator, but then we remember Cincinnatus, of course, through the person of George Washington. And so it's a very deeply un-American concept. And the fact that we have this kind of residual memory, this kind of vestigial memory that says, okay, we can have a temporary dictatorship, the allure of that is very tempting to people. You have to remind them that it's deeply, deeply un-American. Right, and in the American context, the translation of Cincinnatus into American is not running for office a third time, is not retaining, not seeking the office again. It's not willingly giving it up you have power of life and death over everybody, and you willingly give it up because the crisis is resolved. The American version is you don't seek the office again.
It looked like you might have.
May I make a remark about that? Ben, like Reagan, I was always against the 22nd Amendment. I thought it was wrong. I thought if the people wanted to continue to re-elect the president, they should be able to, as with House members and so on. I don't really know anymore. The people are responsible. The Republican Party has nominated Donald Trump 3 times in a row for president. Never before had anyone been nominated for president by the Republican Party 3 times in a row. That honor belongs only, that distinction belongs only to Donald Trump. And I think the party would probably do it again if voters had the chance. What do you do about that? Here the people rule. And I annoy people by quoting Jimmy Carter, who was the first president I was really aware of. I mean, I knew about Nixon. I heard this word Watergate, thought it had something to do with water. And Ford was a Michigan man. I'm from Michigan. But the Carter presidency I followed day by day. Was a political junkie. And he said, America deserves a government as good as its people. That was his slogan. And in fact, that was the title of a collection of Carter's speeches and essays and so on. A government as good as its people. Does a democracy always have such a thing, guys? Is the government no better than in a free and open society? The people decide.
In the end, we get the government that we deserve. In the short term, you can have all kinds of aberrations. But in the end...
Sorry, all kinds of what?
All kinds of aberrations, right? You elect somebody who seems quite good, he turns out to be awful. You elect somebody who seems awful, and she actually turns out to have wonderful qualities, right? All sorts of things happen in the short term. In the long term, a people that does not choose virtuous leadership does not get virtuous leadership. And I don't mean virtuous leadership in the sense of not having affairs or whatever, though that's true too, actually. But I mean civic virtue. I mean political virtue. And if you choose people who lie, cheat, and steal and are open grifters, and you do it 3 times in a row, that's a decision. That's a political decision that's what we are valuing. And why we're valuing that, that's a different conversation. In the end, if you don't select for political virtue, you will not get it.
Any audience questions? Yes.
I'm wondering, as we view Congress, and I'm actually interested in what you think, will let you get to that, to take this question. If you view them as truly representing people they are voted by, what is the role of the nationalization of politics and the money that comes in to primary people out? Like, to me, that distorts whether they're really voting for what I feel like it's distorting what people are actually going for, either by misinformation, fear mongering, like if you don't do this, that this will happen in a way that's never going to actually happen. Or I just feel like the nationalization of politics and the fact that they're not, you're voting for people who are not going to represent you. Well, they've been told that your whole existence is at stake if you don't do it. And so it just feels...
Do you get texts like I do? I think that should be illegal, frankly, but...
There is a time and time. I get your mother terrorizing. He's like, stop fear-mongering, church. I don't want that. But that's the way it is. And so I feel like the idea that people are voting for this, yes, you have to use, everybody should be responsible for their own consuming of information and their faith. But to the extent that are we really voting for what this thing, and then we have a Congress that represents this sort of very extreme side of things. So my 2 questions are, Randy, what do you think the people that you used to work with would say to that? Like, are they capped into that? And second of all,
are there any levers that can be used to fight that? It just seems so unfair.
As far as the nationalization of politics, I agree with you. And I agree with you. I can't tell you how many times I've unsubscribed from some email list that I didn't even subscribe to in the first place, but they sell your data. And then there's some sort of loophole. Like, truly, it should be illegal. I feel like someone who is a member of Congress and like submitted this as an idea would get a lot of support from the people, but maybe not a lot of support from the committees or, you know, their fellow members, right? As they know how all of these lists work. But there's like some sort of loophole where you can unsubscribe from it, but then they change the name that it's coming from. So say it's coming from Johnny Johnson, and it's a certain email address, and then they send it from Johnny Johnson's Victory Fund, and they can still send it to you even though you've unsubscribed. I think that's crazy.
Targeted from the national level to the local level.
Yeah.
To rig the whole system up here.
And I think that what does it take to change the system? I think it takes leaders to change the system. I do think it takes a member of Congress who's willing to say, this is so dumb. I've unsubscribed from this. My constituents are complaining about this. We need to get rid of this. This shouldn't be something that Americans have to deal with. And that's going to get a lot of pushback because there's a lot of money behind these powerful machines and mechanisms. You know, it's the RNC, it's a NRCC, it's a DNC, you know, it's a D-TRIP, and it's all of them who have invested all of this money, these donors, these lists. So I don't know how you change it other than having folks who are willing to take a stand. As we've seen in today's politics, though, that's not necessarily always the case. And I agree with you. I think that when we're talking on the local level about your member of Congress who should be caring about, you know, the water reservoir in your district and being able to get water to where you live. And, you know, in some cases, I'm from California. I work from people from California. Like, we were often talking about like the Delta smell. It's been a few years, so maybe I'm not remembering quite correctly, but those are really local issues that maybe don't get attention on the national level because it doesn't affect people on the national level, but we need to be voting for people who care about those things and are going to come forward with some federal policies if we're talking about Congress, right? So that's a roundabout and long-winded way of saying I don't have an answer other than I hope that we have and elect people with gumption who are willing to stand up for their constituents. And the last thing that I'll say is when we're talking about the nationalization of politics, like I think of someone like AOC, for example, and her popularity and her meteoric rise. And we've seen other members not as successful in that, but we've seen that with other folks as well. Even when we talk about Mamdani in New York City and how, you know, New York City race was always going to get a lot of attention, but it's gotten an astronomical amount of attention probably compared to some of the recent years or cycles. And I think sometimes you see these candidates who are having sort of a lightning rod moment and get a lot of attention, but that attention does not necessarily translate into votes. It does not necessarily translate into the direction that the party is going to go. And I think that we see that very much, and that's why I use AOC as an example. Early on in her career, I'm pretty sure she was considered one of the least effective members of Congress, like her first term or so, because she was just really, really passionate about what she was passionate about and was getting attention in that way, but that doesn't necessarily translate into legislation, right? And I think that we've seen a shift in that for her at least. But it's interesting that we have people who are able to capture the zeitgeists of society, of their party, of their city, whatever it is, and they're able to sort of elevate themselves into this national profile, but it doesn't necessarily translate into much beyond Twitter follows. Sorry, that was really long. Did you guys have any thoughts on that?
I have a. So I see a hand up, Brittany, and I think I'd like to ask an audience member a question. This is Professor Oren Kerr of Stanford Law School, later the Berkeley Law School. He sort of hops around like a baseball player. And I'd like to know what he's going to do to restore respect for the rule of law in this country. It's on his show. If I'm going to hand him a mic, is that okay?
I appreciate Jay
You, Warren.
giving me the small challenges. I think being normal actually is the most important thing we can do. Stick to our traditional principles and not fly off in any one direction. And be a signal to those who are in power that normalcy still reigns. Normalcy is still a viable path, and that there are still normal judgments occurring, because it's so easy to get lost. And I worry in particular that judges would get lost in sort of thinking there's...
Warren, you know that dread expression, new norm. I'm afraid these so-called new normals would be entrenched.
Yeah, so I think it's just returning to the old normal, I guess, is the basic idea of not changing how we approach these questions just because of the latest and what political implications it might have one way or the other. And probably getting off of social media is something we should all do, too, which I'm terribly guilty of.
I think we all need to go touch grass a little bit more these days. Any other audio? Okay, yes, sir.
Touch grass comment there. So this panel, and actually follow up with a question to the audience, because this panel's educated as Jerry does. No question about it. We have an audience here of Baker, St. Louis, and people are on the panel. Yet the American people themselves are not educated in area. And I think of my friends that are not in this room. I think of my friends. I hang out at a dive bar. But I think of my friends there, working class people, and those that support Trump also, though. Okay, it's a visceral thing. It has nothing to do with rule of law. It has nothing to do with democracy. It has little to do with anything that we talk about here today. So my question is, how do we reach people like that? Because they're the ones that vote, and they're the ones that decide. So it's going to be all. Maybe you're not the ones that answer that.
I mean, I've been trying to figure that out for several years. I mean, the one thing I always say to people is that even if you believe this president is the wisest, most just person we've ever had in the Oval Office, he's not going to be president forever. And you really want to hand some suite of powers to this office that will later be wielded by whoever else it might be.
And that doesn't have an effect.
Well, sometimes it depends. I mean, it depends. But I think I can connect with some people on that. But I think it's really hard. Like I said before, I think liberal democracy and restraints on government are an unnatural thing to understand. But we have to try.
Here, I'll be whatever the opposite of Mary Sunshine is. In 2015, 2016, 2017, I was waiting for sort of a general revulsion, a kind of a spiritual revolt or revolt of the stomach against all this. And people said, enough. I've seen too much. I think of the attempt to overturn the 2020 election and the sticking of a mob on the U.S. Congress for the purpose of stopping a constitutional process, which they succeeded in doing for several hours, as the president sat in the White House watching it all unfold on television with relish. Afterward, he called these people, when they were defendants and convicts, patriots and political prisoners. Then after October 7th, 2023, when Hamas attacked Israel, he started calling them hostages, which I thought was obscene. He promised to pardon them on his first day of his new term, which he would go on to do. And they reelected him. All right. That's the verdict of the people. So I stopped waiting for a general revulsion. I don't think it will ever come. And I feel I understand the hardcore Trumpers. I must say, here's a confession. I think part of it had to do with my age and my environment. I was from a very left-wing town, Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I loved Reagan too much, I think. Too much. I defended him through Iran-Contra and Bitburg, and it's not so much that I loved him as I hated his enemies, despised his enemies. So I believe I understand them. As my friend Mona Charen and I used to say, we did a podcast together, cults of personality are bad, even when they're around relatively good people. But around Donald J. Trump? Ben, can you elevate the atmosphere at all? No.
I think you've just hit it absolutely right. When you were dealing with people's comparative hatreds, you can defend anything, because if you hate the enemy enough, you will defend anything, and that's the problem here. It's not that people love Trump. It's that they hate elites enough to defend him under virtually any circumstances against the right enemies. And I think there is actually no way to reason with that. Hatred is very difficult to reason with. What reasons with it is circumstance. And you know, the current environment is reasoning with it. Trump's approval is falling, has fallen rather precipitously, and the reason is that, you know, you can argue all you want about liberal elites and you know, the people you hate his enemies. And your prices are still high, right? And there are still things that he's promised that you have not received. You're aware at some level that there's a war in Ukraine that was not resolved in 24 hours. And you're aware in some level that your prices did not come down on day one, right? And I think you have to have a certain amount of faith in people's I hate the phrase lived experience, but in the experience of failure. And I do think the last several months have been encouraging in that regard, that it's not that I root for failure exactly, but I do find it encouraging that there is not a total disconnect between the degree of failure and people's perception of it. There's much less close connection than one would hope, but it's not zero. And I do think that is what speaks to what it's the only answer I know to the point that Jay is making.
I just want to make things a little bit darker. But I know, I mean, I think this isn't just like a working class problem. I spent a lot of my time talking to right of center law students. In the last month, I was at Harvard and Yale law schools. Both campuses, I heard from right of center students exactly this. The left is so bad, we have no choice but to seize the powers of the state to destroy them. Law students, elite law students, who believe not in law, but in using the powers of the state to destroy their enemies. So this is a deep, deep problem.
Oh, Greg, I have to sleep tonight. I want to make two brief remarks. This first topic is too big for our evening, but I'm not sure, Ben, in the Trump phenomenon, I'm not sure that it's anti-elitism. I'm forgetting the fact that he's a New York trust fund baby, but a lot of fancy people and very well-off people, very comfortable, privileged people, are Trumpers. There is something, isn't there a Batman movie where someone says, some men like to watch the world burn? I sometimes say that if you give me an hour, I can discourse on things. If you give me 10 seconds, I can cite Milton and Paradise Lost. That evil be thou my good. A lot of people, I think, root for the bad guy, and scorn traditions, norms, customs, that which is a little bit every day and humdrum, and they want the excitement of some kind of extremism. My positive dollop is this. If I can pour a little praise on my hosts, organizations such as Principles First and the Society for the Rule of Law, few as they may be, they are, as the first president Bush said, points of light. And I really consider them sort of the Republican Party and the conservative movement in exile. And so I appreciate that you all do this.
I saw a couple questions here. So yes, one, two, and then any. Okay, let's do. How about let's get our questions, and then we will go through them on stage. So.
Thank you. Yeah. So there was a lot of talk about the need for civic education. One question is, do we have empirical evidence that people are less civically educated today? Other than looking at these results of what's actually happening in government? That's one. And then the other is, I think the other side of the coin, affective polarization, right? I hate the other side so much, I'm just going to blindly follow my side because of that hatred. What are the solutions to that affective polarization?
And then
You one mic. Wow, we're gonna really load up on good questions here. My question is: so I've just stepped down as the chair of the San Francisco Republican Party, and I've worked with the young Republicans in San Francisco who are quite interested in Curtis Yarvin. And
yes,
they were interested in Curtis Yarvin because just sort of thinking of. I think the most charitable way of thinking about it is they just sort of view the society as kind of stuck. So, and I think this is actually a real issue. Like if you're young and you want to buy a house or you want other things that your 60-year-old parents have, it's much harder for you. You feel, or it actually is much harder for you to get those things. And so Curtis Yarvin comes along and says, we're just sort of sclerotic as a society and we need to bust things up. I wonder how you feel that the principled conservatives should not only respond to that critique, but respond with policy so that if there ever was any, opportunity to do so, that we would be less sclerotic and those good things that people want would be available to them.
Maybe we start with those two and then go to the next one.
Could I say something about the second one? Because I just feel a revolt within myself. I think of Germany and Italy after what we later called World War I. These were societies that were wrecked and bleeding and down. And of course, fascism appealed. But the United States of America, my God, is it that we have too much prosperity, too much comfort? Life is so good. People are just bored. Imagine the appeal of fascism in this country. I can sort of understand the Germans. You think of that inflation and so on, and think of the terms of the Versailles Treaty, so on and so forth. But today, and it is so true, I think a great many people, especially young men, are sort of bored and interested in excitement. And also, I think that they have... that politics for many is a substitute for religion. And politics is their true faith, and it's very dangerous. A well-known journalist told me last summer, a real reporter, unlike me now, I sit in my armchair, but he travels the length and breadth of this country. And he said to me in, I think, August, no one knows how popular and influential Nick Fuentes is. No one knows. But he's very, very hot with the young. He's clever, he's talented, he's personable, and he's dangerous. And so I was vaguely aware of Nick Fuentes, but a couple of months later, his name was on the front pages, to the extent we still have front pages, or their equivalent today. So, yes, the allure of a liberalism is real and has always existed, and I think it has to be countered with arguments for liberal democracy. This is something that Radek Sikorski impressed on me in a podcast maybe 5 years ago. he was between his stints in government. He's now both the foreign minister and the deputy prime minister of Poland. He said, I'll paraphrase, he didn't say this, I'll paraphrase him. He said, the problem with people like you, Jay, is that you think that liberal democracy is so obviously good that the arguments ought to make themselves. You shouldn't have to argue for limited government, the rule of law, separation of powers, individual rights, freedom of expression, freedom of worship or non-worship, so on and so forth, property rights, a free economy. You think this is just so obvious that people should embrace this, and it's not obvious to a great many. And fascism and other forms of liberalism have a great allure. And I think someone once said, I don't know to whom to attribute this, but someone said the problem with the world is people keep being born, and so, without experience, right? And so every generation has to be taught and retaught. And I thought, I'll be darned, that's true.
I know exactly one person who was persuaded by the arguments for liberal democracy. And he was a Syrian Islamist, ended up taking refugee status or asylum status in the United States after becoming a liberal because he read the American founding documents. This is extremely rare. The much more common thing, and we talk about it in terms of arguments, is that it's felt. It's a more emotional connection. I don't think it's surprising that fascism has an allure in times of relative prosperity. Because the arguments for fascism, which are also not arguments, they're also emotional appeals. They work because people feel stuck, and they're fundamentally aesthetic in character. The greatest of the post-war Japanese fascist thinkers, who was committed enough to it to, commit seppuku in public, Yukio Mishima, was...
Kids had his poster on their dorm room walls when I was in college.
Yeah, so I mean,
yeah.
But this is not this was in a time of prosperity and growth, and what was Mishima arguing against was comfort, and he saw in comfort the lack of spirit. Sounds a little bit like Curtis Yarvin, right? We need something to animate us, something to get excited about. The answer to that, I don't think, lies in argument. It lies in something like spirit. It lies in something like excitement about liberalism. And I don't think you're going to argue people to these things. You have to show people what it means, what its value is, what its electricity is. And, that's a problem that that was not resolved in the context of World War II until the war was fought. Because actually the democratic powers, the liberal powers, could muster industrial capacity that the Axis powers couldn't. They could muster fighting force that the Axis powers ultimately couldn't. These were not arguments. They were what was won in force of arms. They were what was doable. They were showing people that these are actually immensely powerful ideas. But they're not showing them by making arguments. The arguments are what underlies and I'm not suggesting we wage war on people who want to read Curtis Yarvin. But I am suggesting that it is something other than arguing with the thought it's a demonstration. They need demonstrations of the powers of the ideas that they're rejecting.
And I'll just add, Tom, on the civics question, I don't think it's the whole solution to our problem, certainly. But yes, there's you could look at AP government scores that have gone down over the last few decades. Part of it seems to be traced to like a deliberate decision to de-emphasize civics education. There was a bit of a panic in the 70s and 80s about American students falling behind on math and science scores in particular, and the public education resources were very deliberately shifted away from civics to emphasize math and science.
And I think we're almost at about time, but I know we had a couple questions, so maybe we could do collect them and then answer them again.
I want to harken back to something Jay said about humdrum. So my question is about the humdrum things. I've been here in the United States for about 26 years now. When I came here, there was just so much about the system that attracted me, given what I had left behind in my home country at the time. And for the first 15 years, I'd say I paid absolutely no attention to politics. I didn't want to. But more importantly, I didn't have to. It was so much fun. And then 2015 happened, and I started waking up and thinking, hold on a second, this is not good. And I'm going to channel my inner Jonathan last year, because I read him religiously every day. One of the things that he talked about was the humdrum stuff, which is the core systems that have been destroyed in just 10 months. And I don't mean the East Room, although, of course, that has been leveled. Things like USAID, gone. The JAGs in the military, gone. Lawyers in the FBI who had fought for the J6 conventions, gone. Convictions, gone. And Javier's point was, it's very easy to destroy. It is really, really hard to rebuild. And I agree with that. And I want one or all of you to talk me off the ledge here. It's like, when all of this changes.
That is a deeply conservative point. Deeply conservative.
I'm not conservative, so here we are.
That it takes conservative in a higher sense, if you will.
Yeah, okay.
It takes generations and generations to build things up, to establish institutions.
Hence the term conservative. I agree.
That's conservatism. And then it can all, it turns out to be fairly fragile when the wreckers come.
Yeah. So all of that stuff, like he will shuffle off the mortal coil at some point. We will have a new president. We will have new people. We will, that's the hope I hold on to. How easy or difficult is it going to be able to rebuild all this? Like they will have filled up the cadres of, with loyalists. And what does one do? Like the Fed chair, the next Fed chair is going to be a loyalist. All of that, like how does one come back from this?
One more here.
Following up the point about the new norm and Jay's point about sort of that referendum and correcting course, what I'm worried about similar, which is after, a few years after, like these are still precedents. Like previously, we've never thought about responding to journalist question with a non sequitur or an insult as a fine response. We've never thought about
or a questioner.
You're too young to know this, but people, oldsters like me in the conservative movement, we talked every day, nauseatingly, I'm sure, about character, the importance of character in office.
Do you remember when we were outraged that Bill Clinton wore jeans in the Oval Office?
Yeah, and I think Obama wore a tan suit. And in 1998, William J.
Never wore a
Bennett...
dog shirt, though.
Bill Bennett published a book, a wild national bestseller called The Death of Outrage. President Bill Clinton and the assault on American ideals. Wasn't that long ago. Sorry, keep going.
But yes, to continue,
Sure.
another case, for example, which is potentially like lying to the court in that deportation, currently the contempt hearing in D.C., right? Sort of that loss of presumption of regularity or good faith in making arguments. That affects the entire DOJ, the solicitor's office. And then obviously wielding DOJ as a weapon to coerce people in terms of people who dissent, in terms of protesters. And we have media, we have universities that are capitulating. So all of these perhaps never thought about, but they're all working. So going forward, even if it's no longer the new norm, even if the next administration doesn't do this, the example has been set. This could be done. It has worked before. So what are the driving forces to sort of make sure that like the government is feels more responsible to answer to the public and sort of aware that these are powers that these are tools they should not use, even though they have been done before.
You all want to be reassured. That's what you're asking for.
So Groucho Marx, when he was in his 90s, used to tell a joke of a guy who's taken out on a scaffold, and they put a rope around his neck, and they ask him, "Do you have any last words?" And he looks up, and he says, "Yeah, I don't think this thing's safe." And that's all of us right now. We're standing there with a rope around our necks. We're looking at the scaffold, and we're worried about the safety of the scaffold. And I want to say, with all due respect, it's the wrong question, and it's the wrong question, whichever way you frame it. We got to take the rope off from around our necks. And then we got to get down off the scaffold. And then we've got to get rid of the scaffold. Worrying that the scaffold isn't safe when, the guy's got his hand on the trap, it's the wrong point of intervention. And so yes, we have a massive rebuilding project to do. And we also have a problem of, in doing that rebuilding, not confusing that with retribution, not confusing that with using the same set of powers in a different direction. But right now we have 3 more years of this, and we got to get through them. We got to protect the people who are still in government, a lot of whom need protection. We got to take care of thousands and thousands of people who are coming out of government, tens of thousands, some of them willingly, some of them semi-willingly, some of them not willingly. We've got to preserve a lot of institutional capacity by means normal and abnormal. And yes, we are going to have to think about how to rebuild. Right now, we have to think about how to conserve. And I mean that both in the sense of conservatism, how to minimize damage, but also in a more canning kind of way. We have this enormous canning, as in
preserves.
Yes, preserves. We have people coming out. So we hired one FBI agent. Some of you have seen him, Mike Feinberg. Mike and I are old workout buddies. And I knew the day Trump 2 was happening, I knew Mike wouldn't make it through. I didn't know I never dreamed what the mechanism was going to be, but I just knew. What's that? Yeah, I actually know Pete through Mike, not the other way around. But it's that's why he was fired. It never occurred to me that would be the reason. But just the idea that Mike would be asked to do something that was not appropriate and wouldn't do it and wouldn't last, I knew was very likely. Mike has, exquisite background. He's a 15-year counterintelligence officer who speaks good Mandarin, has an unusual combination of backgrounds. We're losing a lot of people like that. People with, art theft backgrounds who have, who know how to figure out if a Rembrandt is real, right? These are not
experts on Russian oligarchs.
Experts on Russian oligarchs, experts on all kinds of arcana associated with money laundering, right? These are things that are very, very, very difficult to train, and takes very long periods of time. We have to take care of those people. We have to figure out how to employ them so that they are in a position to go back into government 3 years from now, in a world in which government is sane again. We have to, and by the way, we know how to do that with the Justice Department. We don't know how to do that with the FBI. So with the Justice Department, we have these storage facilities. They're called law firms, and they work really well. And we even know we have rules that says, okay, you can hang out there, you can make a lot of money, but then when you go in, you're not allowed to represent the other side of we know exactly what the rules are. People do it all the time, and it works. We have no analog for that, for the investigative side. We need to figure that out. But there are answers to these questions. They're just going to take a lot of work. The shorter term problem is taking care of the people. Because if you don't create spaces for the Mike Feinbergs, and by the way, I'm using Mike as an example here, you could say the same thing about 50,000 Defense Department employees, right? If you don't create spaces that are essentially storage containers for these people to do valuable work for a few years and then go back in, they will just eventually find careers that disconnect them from their fields. And that seems to me to be the fundamental challenge right now. There's no analog to the law school. There's no analog to, for the average civil servant, some of whom I have one kid I work with who is an expert on Romanian money laundering, organized crime in Romania. And Moldova. They speak Romanian and Moldova. What do you do for her? She's 24 or 25. How do you preserve an analyst like that in amber for another few years? Because eventually we're going to care about Moldova and organized crime. And you need to be able to, like Jurassic Park, take these things out, melt the amber away and, clone the dinosaur. And we have a whole agency of USAID people like that. And we need to figure out ways to preserve, it's going to take a lot of money. It's going to take, all those mythical George Soros foundations. They need to be investing in this.
Yeah, I agree with all that, but I will try to cheer you up for a second. This is a massive...
Trying to cheer it up.
This is a massive problem, but I really do believe that if we are deliberate and intentional about it, we can repair this damage. We have a huge country with a lot of very talented people. It's an exciting, rewarding thing to work in government. It truly is. And we need leadership that cares about rebuilding this. I think who the next president is will matter, but maybe more so who the next attorney general is, and people in roles like that are going to matter a great deal. I think that we can take a lot of damage over 4 years and rebuild. I don't know if that's true over 8 or 12. So the next moment's going to be very, very important. We really, really whiffed after the first Trump term, right? There was talk about things we're going to do to fix executive overreach and rebalance the separation of powers, and zero was done by the Biden administration, and the public didn't care. We cannot do that again. So as important as this work that Ben is talking about right now is, we really, I think, do need to start thinking hard and putting plans in place for how we're going to start the rebuilding project in 2-3 years.
There's a slogan of from the Motel 6 chain. We'll leave the light on for you. Leave the light on. All of us, each of us must leave the light on. Let it shine. Just in our daily lives, our individual walks. I think that's the best we can do, and it's not bad. We all to be one's best self, you know. And I may make a sort of political sciencey remark. The conservative in America is really someone who wants to conserve the principles and ideals of the founding, which are liberal in a classical sense. Hope that doesn't make anyone dizzy, but that's our lives, the likes of us.
Organizations can help do, and one of the reasons people are here, I think, is to sort of learn more about what your organizations are doing and can help with this issue, right? We're hearing a lot of people talk about civics, and obviously that's a long-term problem.
Yes, I tell you what I do. If you can find a politician worth supporting, a candidate, do so. I do. And these points of light, to use Bushian language again, if you like, no matter how small they are, if they're sincere, if they're wise, if they're doing the right things, and I like to support them in various ways, including the financial, and every little bit counts. That's what our political life is. And sometimes something small can grow into something big, but even when it remains small, it's still worthwhile. So I often write checks, not great checks, because I'm a journalist, but my little checks in December. I must say it's such a joy, you know, and, $100 here and $250 there, and makes me feel good.
And gifts to the Society for the Rule of Law are tax deductible, so we can...
So there's that. So there's that. And as I think Gregg said, it's a big, broad, star-spangled country. And so that was rather uplifting. When are you running for office, by the way?
Yeah, that's another timeline that we are not in.
I just want to say a word about events like this. You know, I get asked to speak, as do my co-panelists, kind of constantly, and it's it's always a question, like, is this a good use of my time? The first time I got asked to speak at a Principles First event was at the first summit, and I found myself on a panel with one Gregg Nunziata, whom I'd never met before, but we were kind of eyed each other warily, I think, when we sat down, and we come from very different places politically. And I think we both expected to spar a fair bit at that panel. And we found that we could not find a point on which to disagree, which was, I think, a little bit alarming to both of us. And at one point, Gregg even said, I'm going to, he basically said, I'm going to needle you now and get you. And he said he thought we should be more profligate with impeachments because to sort of force people to take positions on things. And I thought about it for a minute. And I said, yeah, I agree with that. And
you're both constitutionalists, so therefore you are brothers.
And this was early-ish in the realization that there are pre-political values that are much, much deeper than anything that we've ever bothered to disagree about. And we've been friends ever since and have really not found a lot to disagree about ever since. And I do think the lesson of that, which I tell not merely to embarrass Gregg, but because it is actually the story of my life politically over the last 8 years, that that the value of events like this is that you are constantly meeting people who you think you should have nothing in common with politically, and you in fact have everything in common with politically, and you end up working with very closely. And so in partial answer to your question, I would say go to 1,000 things, including things that you don't think are likely to be useful. You will be wrong in 200 of the 1,000 things. And, you know, I cannot tell you, ever since I discarded the robes that I had draped myself in for the previous, 25 years, that I was apolitical and didn't engage in, I didn't endorse candidates, I didn't give political donations, I didn't make political statements. Ever since I just decided I was out of, hex to give, and I was just going to do what felt right. The number of people that I've come to work with closely from places that I never would have imagined, some of them much further away than Gregg, has really astounded me. And I do think there's a lot to be found in places like this. And so I am delighted that you all came, and I do think going to things like this matters a lot.
And then as we close things out, I'll just make one final plug for Principles First. And if you want to do it for Society for Rule of Law too, we have our upcoming summit, as we said, February 20th through the 22nd in National Harbor, Maryland, right outside DC. And we host these events all over the country. So to give you a little bit of a statistic, and kind of as we're scaling up, Principles First, we're in our 6th year. The first 5 years, we held, I think, 63 events, because I counted all of the Eventbrites and, tried to see that. In this year alone, we've had about 33. And so, to be able to scale in that way, and a lot of these events are like this, it takes a lot of time and effort. And by the way, this is usually part of my spiel at the beginning, but I forgot today. I'm the only staffer. Everybody else is a volunteer. John put in so much work and so many emails, to help with the planning of this event. And we only do it. Yes. Yeah, no, please. Thank you. Yes, John. We are run on 99.99% volunteer power, and I'm just a 0.001% that is staff, and that's it. And none of this gets done without people. And they've just found, friends and like-minded folks. And I think what we're trying to do here is create a home for those who feel left behind by their parties and don't really feel like they have a place. And beyond that, we often get asked, are we going to do a PAC? Are you guys going to run people? Are you endorsing people? We're a 501c3 and a C4, so we have to be careful about those sorts of things. However, what I will say is that in creating this community, we are connecting with like-minded folks who care a lot about the same things that we do, and we're paying attention, and we're, making community forums, and we're doing town halls, and we're working in the ways that we can to ensure that we have principled leaders in these positions. And, the people in this room too run for office, right? Maybe that's not your thing. Maybe it's your cousin running for office who feels the same way that you do. Maybe it's your neighbor, but I think it's making sure that we find those leaders and that we elevate them, and not sort of these sycophants for cult of personality. And
Brittany, I just thought of this phrase. You can write this down. It's
Yes.
totally original to me. If not us, who? If not now, when?
Go figure. I've never heard that one before. No, it's one of my favorite quotes, and I think it's really relevant to this moment. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you to our incredible panelists. If you'll please join me in giving them a round of applause.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Oh, sorry. Did you want to?
Oh, well.
Sorry. No.
Yeah, I'll be okay. Society for the Rule of Law.org. We're a national membership organization, so we have memberships. The heart of our organization is conservative lawyers, but the rule of law is more important than being a conservative or being a lawyer. So you do not need to be either of those things if you want to become a member. And we put out a lot of content. We do a lot of webinars, scholarship. We do some advocacy, some amicus briefs. So we'd love to have your support. And if not your support financially, just your interest to follow our website and get on our mailing list. I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes, and thank you, everyone, for being here tonight.